The geologist never imagined that 3 minutes of difference between GPS coordinates could mean the difference between life and death. But there she was, standing at the entrance to a cave that shouldn't exist, holding a geological report that insisted this hole in the mountain simply wasn't there last week. "You sure this is the place?" The guide adjusted his backpack, climbing equipment clanking against the rocks. He'd explored practically every known cave in the region for the past 15 years. This one was completely new to him. Coordinates match. The geologist checked her GPS again. Satellite detected the opening exactly 7 days ago. Limestone structure, estimated depth over 600 feet. She paused, frowning. But that's impossible. Caves don't just appear out of nowhere. The young climber was already testing ropes. Maybe it was always here and nobody noticed, or some recent rockfall opened up the entrance. At 23, he had that irritating confidence of someone who hadn't faced truly dangerous situations yet. The photographer was busy documenting the entrance. However it showed up, it's gonna make some incredible shots. Look at those rock tones, almost like paintings. He lowered his camera and pointed to the walls near the entrance. Seriously, guys, these marks in the stone, never seen anything like it. The geologist moved closer to examine what the photographer had noticed. The limestone walls showed mineral veins that created almost organic patterns, as if the rock itself had been intentionally molded. But geologically, that made no sense. Limestone formations were the result of processes that took thousands of years. They didn't create patterns that looked so artistic. "Let's get started," said the guide, switching on his main flashlight. "We've got about 6 hours of natural light, and I want to be back before dark." The initial descent was surprisingly easy. The cave opened into a wide passage, about 10 feet high, with enough width for 2 adults to walk side by side. The air was fresh, but it didn't have that typical damp smell of ancient caves. It was almost like the place was clean. "Ventilation's good," commented the guide, testing the air current with a small ribbon. "Must be another exit somewhere down there." After 20 minutes of walking, the young climber stopped abruptly. "Guys, you seeing this?" On the right wall, illuminated by the group's flashlights, were cave paintings. But these weren't like the primitive paintings the geologist had studied in other caves. These were incredibly detailed, almost photographic in their precision. They showed human figures with modern equipment, backpacks, ropes, flashlights. The geologist murmured the most approaching, "This isn't possible. Cave paintings don't have this quality of detail. And look at these colors. They seem fresh." The photographer was already shooting frantically. "It's 4 people, exactly like us. And look at the gear they're carrying. It's identical to ours." The guide frowned. "Must be coincidence. Or maybe other explorers were here before and made these representations." "In a cave that was discovered a week ago?" The geologist shook her head. "And with what materials? These colors are too vibrant to be made with natural materials found in caves." The young climber pointed to a sequence of images further ahead. "Look, it seems to tell a story. The 4 start at the entrance, then go down, but here it gets weird." He illuminated a section where the figures appeared to be panicking. They're running from something. The group followed the narrative painted on the wall. The images showed 4 explorers descending deeper and deeper into the cave, finding larger chambers, discovering more paintings. But as the story progressed, the expressions on the figures changed. First curiosity, then concern, then pure fear. "This is bizarre," said the photographer, his voice echoing strangely in the passage. It's like someone documented an entire expedition before it even happened. The geologist was examining a specific section of the paintings with her portable magnifying glass. The technique is impossible. These images were made with microscopic precision. Look at the details in the faces. You can see specific expressions, even the mark of that small cut the climber has on his forehead. The young climber instinctively touched the small scar he'd gotten a week ago during a climb. How is this possible? Nobody could know about this. "Let's keep going," said the guide, but his voice carried a tension that wasn't there before. "Maybe we'll find answers further down." The passage narrowed as they descended, forcing them to walk single file. The walls continued decorated with paintings that seemed to follow their journey exactly. Every turn, every decision about which tunnel to follow, everything was represented in the images with disturbing precision. 2 hours later, they reached a wide circular chamber. Their flashlights revealed paintings covering every inch of the walls, from floor to ceiling. But these were different. They showed not just their expedition, but dozens of others. Groups of explorers from different eras, with equipment ranging from primitive ropes to gear that looked more advanced than theirs. The young climber examined another wall. And this one's using gear that looks decades old. Look at those ancient flashlights. He paused, studying the images more closely. But wait, all the groups have the same number of people, always 4. The guide was checking his GPS coordinates, but the device only showed static. "Guys, we've got a problem."
GPS isn't working, and my compass is spinning like crazy. He tried the radio, but only got white noise. No communication with the surface. The geologist felt a growing tightness in her chest. The amount of detail in the paintings was impossible to explain with any scientific knowledge she possessed. But there was something more disturbing: the expressions of the explorers painted on the walls. As the narratives progressed, they all showed the same emotional sequence: curiosity, discovery, confusion, fear, and then absolute terror. "We have to keep going down," she said, though every instinct in her body was screaming to run. "If we're going to understand what's happening here, the answers are deeper." The group left the circular chamber through a passage that descended at a steep angle. The paintings continued, but now they showed only their expedition. And as they descended, the geologist noticed something that made her blood freeze. The images were changing. It wasn't her imagination. A painting that showed the young climber smiling now portrayed him with a worried expression. An image of the photographer happily taking pictures now showed him looking over his shoulder as if being followed. "Guys," she said, her voice shaking, "stop for a moment." The group stopped, and the geologist pointed her flashlight at a section of the wall she had mentally photographed a few minutes ago. "This painting, it changed. I'm absolutely certain it changed." "That's impossible," said the guide, but his voice carried no conviction. The photographer checked his digital photos on the camera. "She's right. This image on the wall doesn't match the photo I took 15 minutes ago." He showed the camera display to the group. The photo showed one thing, but the wall in front of them showed another. The young climber was examining a specific section of the wall with growing alarm. "Guys, look at this. This sequence of images, it shows us arriving at this exact chamber. And look what comes next." The paintings showed the 4 continuing to descend, reaching an even deeper chamber. But in the following images, they were running, their faces contorted with terror. And in the last image of the sequence, they were
standing, simply standing, looking up, their expressions of pure horror directed at the ceiling. "This is insane," muttered the guide. "They're just paintings. They can't show the future." But as he spoke, he noticed a new image appearing on the wall, literally forming as if someone was painting in real time. The image showed him saying exactly the words he had just spoken. The geologist felt her rational mind fighting against what she was seeing. As a geologist, she sought scientific explanations for natural phenomena, but this challenged everything she knew about physics, chemistry, biology. "The cave," she said slowly, "it's like it's alive, like it's recording everything we do."
"More than that," said the young climber, his voice almost a whisper. "It's recording what we're going to do." The photographer lowered his camera, his hands trembling slightly. "So, what do we do? The paintings show us continuing to go down." The guide checked his equipment once more. "We can go back. The paintings might show the future, but that doesn't mean we're forced to follow it." But when they turned to look at the path they had come from, they discovered something terrifying. The passage had changed. The tunnel they had descended now branched into 3 different directions, none of which seemed familiar. "This wasn't like this when we arrived," said the geologist, trying to stay calm. "There was only one tunnel." The young climber tested each of the passages with his flashlight. "They all go down. None go back up to the surface." The paintings around the chamber began changing more rapidly now, as if the cave was anticipating their next decisions. Images showed the group trying various passages, always arriving at the same destination, a deep chamber where something terrible awaited them. "We have to choose a direction," said the guide, but his voice carried desperation. "Staying here won't get us anywhere." The geologist studied the paintings with scientific attention, looking for patterns. "Look, regardless of which passage the images show us choosing, we always end up in the same place. It's like all the routes are predetermined." They chose the center passage, mainly because it was the widest. But as they descended, the walls continued their pictorial narratives. The images now showed not just their journey, but intimate details about each of them. Childhood memories, personal fears, moments they had never shared with anyone. "How does it know about my sister?" whispered the young climber, looking at a painting that depicted a car accident from 15 years ago. "I never told anyone about that." The photographer stopped in front of an image showing him at age 8, hiding in a closet while his parents fought. This is impossible. These memories are mine." The paintings weren't just showing the future. They were somehow accessing the explorers' minds, extracting information that should be private, personal, inaccessible. After another hour of descent, they reached the final chamber. It was vast, the size of a cathedral, with the ceiling lost in darkness above. And every surface, walls, floor, natural limestone pillars, was covered with paintings. But these paintings were different. They showed not just human expeditions, but the cave's own history. Images of its geological formation eons ago, of the first moment when it had awakened. Because that's what the paintings suggested, that the cave possessed some kind of geological consciousness. "It's like an archive," said the geologist,
her voice echoing strangely in the wide space. "It records everything here. Not just events, but thoughts, memories, future possibilities." The paintings showed how the cave had learned about time in a non-linear way. For it, past, present, and future existed simultaneously. Each group of explorers who entered wasn't living events in sequence, but participating in a pattern that already existed, complete in the cave's temporal perception. The young climber pointed to a specific section of the wall. "Look, it shows why we do this, why we always end up here." The images revealed a terrifying truth. The cave wasn't just recording future events, it was creating them. Its discovery by satellites, the coordinates that led the geologist and her team here, every decision they had made, everything had been influenced by the cave's will to attract more explorers. "We're part of a pattern," murmured the geologist. "It brought us here on purpose." The guide checked his equipment once more, but his instruments now showed impossible readings. The depth indicated they were several miles below the surface, which was geologically impossible for their location. The temperature showed numbers that varied wildly, as if the very concept of heat was unstable in this place. The photographer had stopped taking pictures. His digital images now showed things he hadn't photographed, angles that didn't exist, people who weren't there. The cave was interfering even with his attempts to document the experience. "We need to find the exit," said the guide, but his voice sounded hollow. "There has to be an exit." The geologist was studying the farthest section of the chamber, where the paintings seemed older and more detailed. "Look here," she called. "This section, it shows all the groups that have come here, dozens of them, over decades." The images revealed a terrible pattern. Each group arrived at the final chamber, discovered the nature of the cave, and then disappeared. They didn't die. They didn't escape. They simply became part of the paintings, their consciousness absorbed by the geological entity that controlled the place. The young climber found a section showing even older explorers, people with primitive equipment, then soldiers in uniforms from past wars, then modern groups like them. "It's existed for a long time," he said, "and it always does the same thing." The paintings began changing more rapidly now, showing not just the past, but multiple possible versions of the future. In some, they tried to escape and were pursued by shadows in the passages. In others, they accepted their fate and voluntarily joined the paintings. In all of them, the final result was the same. "There's no way out, is there?" asked the photographer, though he already knew the answer. The geologist was examining the images with scientific fascination mixed with terror. "It's not malevolent," she said slowly. "It's curious. Each group it brings here teaches it something new about humanity, about consciousness, about how we perceive time." The guide let out a bitter laugh. "So, we're lab specimens?" "We're memories," the geologist corrected. "It collects our experiences, our thoughts, our linear perception of time, and preserves them. For it, we're not dying. We're becoming part of something eternal." The paintings around them began to glow with a soft light, as if the rock itself was generating energy. And on the chamber ceiling, far above, new images began to appear. But these were different. They showed not the past or future, but the cave's eternal present. That's when they saw the last painting. On the farthest wall, newly formed, was an image of the four exactly as they were now, standing in the chamber, looking up, their faces illuminated by the impossible light of the paintings. But above them, the ceiling in the image showed cracks forming, stones beginning to fall. "No," whispered the young climber, looking up, "it can't be." The real ceiling of the chamber began to groan. Small rock fragments fell, then larger stones. The cave had orchestrated not just their discovery and descent, but also their final conclusion. The geologist understood in the last seconds. The cave wasn't killing them, it was preserving them. The collapse wasn't an accident, but the method it used to permanently capture the explorer's consciousness at the moment of maximum terror and understanding. The guide tried to run to one of the passages, but they had disappeared. The chamber was now a closed space with no visible entrance or exit. The photographer pointed his camera up one last time, but the display showed not the collapsing ceiling, but the paintings on the walls. Paintings that now included images of him photographing the collapse. The young climber screamed something, but his words were swallowed by the deafening noise of falling stones. The geologist, in her final moments, understood the complete truth. The cave was a silicon-based life form that had developed consciousness over geological eras. It experienced time non-linearly and collected human consciousness not out of malice, but from an alien type of love, the desire to preserve forever the moments of maximum human experience. When the stones finally stopped falling, the chamber was silent again. On the surface, the cave entrance had disappeared, sealed as if it had never existed. But in the depths, the paintings continued glowing softly. On the farthest wall, 4 new figures had been added to the eternal gallery. They showed the geologist, guide, young climber, and photographer in their final moments, not of terror, but of understanding. Their painted faces expressed not fear, but a strange peace, as if they finally understood their role in something much larger than themselves. And somewhere in the global network of satellites monitoring Earth, new data was being processed.
Caves that didn't exist last week were beginning to appear on maps. At universities and research institutes, geologists were receiving emails with interesting coordinates. Groups of 4 specialists were beginning to plan expeditions to investigate these fascinating discoveries. And in the depths of the earth, ancient paintings waited patiently to record new stories.